Have you ever felt like you don't quite belong? Like you're walking through life on a different frequency than everyone else around you? While others seem content with surface-level conversations and shallow connections, you find yourself craving something deeper, something more meaningful. And because of this, you've spent far more time alone than you ever expected. If this resonates with you, you're not broken, you're not antisocial, and you're certainly not weird. According to the profound insights of Carl Jung, one of the most influential psychologists in history, you might be what he would call chosen for a different path, a path of individuation, depth, and profound self-discovery. Today, we're diving deep into the Jungian perspective on why certain individuals experience prolonged periods of solitude, and why this isn't a curse, but rather a calling. This isn't about spiritual ego or feeling superior to others. It's about understanding the psychological architecture of those who are compelled toward deeper consciousness. Carl Jung introduced a concept that would revolutionize our understanding of human psychology: individuation. This is the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, separate from the collective expectations, societal programming, and unconscious patterns that most people never question. Individuation isn't a choice in the traditional sense. It's more like a calling that some people feel in their bones. While the majority of humanity is content to live within the comfort of collective thinking, absorbed in group identity and social conformity, there are those who feel an almost painful pull towards something different. They feel compelled to question everything, to dig beneath the surface, to understand not just what they think, but why they think it. This process is inherently isolating. Think about it. When everyone around you is discussing the latest trends, gossip, or surface-level entertainment, and you're consumed with questions about the nature of consciousness, the meaning of suffering, or the patterns that repeat through your life, you naturally drift apart. It's not that you think you're better than others. It's that you're operating on a different wavelength entirely. Jung understood that individuation requires solitude. The journey inward cannot be made in the company of those who are still fully identified with the external world. To truly know yourself, you must spend time with yourself, and this means periods of aloneness that can feel unbearable to those who haven't answered this call. The chosen ones, as we might call them, are those who cannot ignore this call. They may try to fit in, to be normal, to engage with superficial connections, but it never quite works. There's always a sense of wearing a mask, of playing a role, of not being fully authentic. And this inauthenticity becomes more painful than being alone. So they withdraw, not out of fear or social anxiety necessarily, but out of a deep need for authenticity. They'd rather be alone and real than surrounded by people while feeling utterly isolated in their truth. One of the most challenging aspects of why chosen ones spend so much time alone relates to Jung's concept of the shadow. The shadow represents all the parts of ourselves that we've repressed, denied, or hidden away because they don't fit with our self-image or society's expectations. Most people go through life completely unaware of their shadow. They project it onto others, blame external circumstances for their problems, and never look deeply at their own darkness. But those on the path of individuation cannot avoid this confrontation. In fact, they're drawn to it like a moth to a flame. Facing your shadow is not pleasant work. It requires you to acknowledge your capacity for cruelty, selfishness, jealousy, rage, and all the other qualities you'd prefer to believe you don't possess. It means sitting with uncomfortable truths about yourself, examining your motives, and taking radical responsibility for your psychological patterns. This work demands solitude. You cannot do shadow work while maintaining a busy social calendar and constantly distracting yourself with external stimulation. The shadow reveals itself in quiet moments, in dreams, in the patterns that emerge when you're alone with your thoughts long enough to actually see them clearly. People who haven't done this work often find those who have to be unsettling. There's an intensity, a groundedness, and a refusal to participate in collective delusions that makes others uncomfortable. The person who has integrated their shadow speaks uncomfortable truths, sees through facades, and cannot participate in the social games that lubricate most relationships. This is another reason for the prolonged aloneness. Once you've seen behind the curtain of your own psyche, you can't unsee it, and you start to see through the unconscious patterns of others as well. This doesn't make you judgmental. If anything, shadow work creates profound compassion. But it does make superficial relationships feel hollow and exhausting. Jung once said that people will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own souls. The chosen ones are those who cannot avoid it, even when they desperately want to. And this commitment to inner truth creates a natural distance from those still running from themselves. Those who walk the path of individuation often develop what can only be described as psychic sensitivity. This isn't about supernatural abilities. It's about an acute awareness of psychological energy, unspoken dynamics, and the gap between what people say and what they actually mean. Jung understood that everything carries energy, including thoughts, emotions, and intentions. Those who have spent significant time in solitude, doing inner work and developing self-awareness, become increasingly attuned to these subtle energies. They can walk into a room and immediately sense the emotional atmosphere. They can tell when someone is being inauthentic, even if that person doesn't realize it themselves. This sensitivity is both a gift and a burden. It allows for deep intuition, genuine empathy, and the ability to see truth beneath surface appearances. But it also makes most social environments overwhelming and exhausting. Small talk feels like nails on a chalkboard. Networking events feel like a circus of competing egos. Even well-meaning social gatherings can feel draining when filled with people wearing psychological masks. The chosen ones aren't being elitist when they withdraw from these environments. They're practicing necessary self-preservation. Just as someone with sensitive hearing needs to protect themselves from loud noises, those with psychological sensitivity need to protect themselves from the chaos of unconscious collective energy. This is why they've been alone for so long. They're not finding their people in ordinary social spaces. The connections they crave, the depth they need, cannot be found at surface level. And rather than settle for connections that leave them feeling more alone than actual solitude, they choose to wait. They choose to remain in the aloneness until they encounter others who are also walking this deeper path. Jung emphasized that not everyone needs to individuate, that many people are perfectly suited for collective life. But for those who are called to this deeper work, there's no going back. Once you've tasted authentic connection with yourself, superficial connections with others become impossible to tolerate. A crucial aspect of the Jungian journey that explains prolonged solitude is what he called the death and rebirth cycle. This is the psychological process where old versions of the self must die to make room for new, more authentic expressions of who we are. Throughout life, we construct identities based on family expectations, cultural conditioning, trauma responses, and unconscious patterns inherited from our ancestors. These identities serve us for a time, helping us navigate childhood, adolescence, and early adulthood. But eventually, for those on the path of individuation, these constructed selves begin to feel constraining, false, and ultimately unbearable. This is when the death process begins. The old self must be dismantled, and this dismantling is almost always experienced in solitude. You cannot transform while maintaining all your old relationships, habits, and environments. Something has to give. Often, many things have to give. The chosen ones find themselves in what Jung called the dark night of the soul, periods of profound isolation where everything they once believed about themselves and the world crumbles. Friendships that once seemed solid fall away. Careers that once provided identity lose their meaning. Beliefs that once offered comfort reveal themselves as illusions. This death process is terrifying. There's a reason most people avoid it at all costs. It feels like annihilation because, in a very real psychological sense, it is. The person you thought you were is dying, and the person you're becoming hasn't fully emerged yet. You're in the void, the liminal space between identities, and this space demands aloneness. Society doesn't understand this process. When you're going through a psychological death and rebirth, people often think you're having a breakdown. They try to fix you, medicate you, or convince you to return to your old self. But for those undergoing genuine transformation, there is no going back. The old self is dead or dying, and the only way out is through. This is why the solitude has been so long. Real transformation takes time. You can't rush the death of an old self or the birth of a new one. Just as a caterpillar must spend time in the chrysalis before emerging as a butterfly, the human psyche requires periods of isolation to complete its metamorphosis. After all this inner work, after facing the shadow, after going through death and rebirth cycles, after developing acute sensitivity to energy and authenticity, the chosen ones emerge with a very specific relationship to connection. They no longer seek connection for its own sake. They seek soul-level recognition. Jung spoke about synchronicity, meaningful coincidences that reveal the hidden order beneath surface reality. For those who have individuated to some degree, relationships must have this quality of synchronicity, of meant-to-be-ness, of souls recognizing each other across the noise of ordinary life. This is an incredibly high standard, and it explains why these individuals have been alone for so long. They're not interested in casual friendships based on proximity or convenience. They're not looking for relationships that merely pass time or provide distraction. They're seeking mirrors, people who can see them fully, who have done similar inner work, who can meet them in the depths rather than just skimming the surface. These connections are rare, extremely rare, in a world where most people are still unconscious, still identified with their masks, still running from their shadow. Finding someone who has done the work of individuation is like finding a needle in a haystack. But here's what Jung understood that brings hope to this situation. When you do the work of becoming yourself, you naturally magnetize others who have done the same work. Authenticity calls to authenticity. Depth calls to depth. The more fully you individuate, the more likely you are to encounter others on the same path. The aloneness, then, serves a purpose. It's not punishment. It's preparation. Every hour spent in solitude, doing the inner work, facing the shadow, allowing old selves to die, is an hour spent becoming the kind of person who can recognize and be recognized by kindred spirits. The chosen ones have been alone because they refuse to settle for less than genuine connection. And this refusal, while painful, is also a form of profound self-respect. It's a commitment to truth over comfort, to authenticity over belonging, to soul over ego. Jung didn't view solitude as merely a necessary evil or a temporary hardship. He saw it as a profound gift, an opportunity for psychological and spiritual development that simply cannot occur in constant company. In solitude, we encounter ourselves without the distortion of social masks. We discover what we actually think, feel, and believe when we're not performing for an audience. We learn to distinguish between our authentic voice and the internalized voices of parents, society, and culture. The chosen ones have received an education in aloneness that most people never get. They've learned to be comfortable with silence, to sit with difficult emotions without immediately seeking distraction, to find fulfillment from within rather than constantly seeking it from without. This doesn't mean they don't want connection. Humans are wired for relationship, and the individuated person understands this deeply. But they've learned something crucial. The quality of your relationship with yourself determines the quality of all your other relationships. If you're comfortable in your own company, You won't tolerate relationships that require you to abandon yourself. If you've found meaning and purpose through inner work, you won't desperately cling to external validation. If you've learned to hear your own intuition in silence, you won't be easily swayed by the noise of collective opinion. The gift of prolonged solitude is self-sufficiency without isolation, independence without disconnection, wholeness without needing others to complete you. Paradoxically, this makes you more capable of genuine intimacy, not less. When you don't need someone to fill a void or complete you, you can actually see and appreciate them for who they are. Jung emphasized that individuation isn't about becoming separate from humanity. It's about becoming your unique expression of humanity. The time spent alone isn't wasted. It's invested in becoming someone who can eventually contribute something real and valuable to the collective. One of Jung's most revolutionary concepts was the collective unconscious, the idea that beneath our individual psyches lies a shared repository of human experience, archetypes, and wisdom. We're all connected at this deep level, swimming in the same psychological ocean even when we feel utterly alone. For the chosen ones, the prolonged solitude often serves a purpose in relation to this collective unconscious. They're not just doing personal work, they're doing work that will eventually benefit others. By facing their own shadow, they help lighten the collective shadow. By individuating, they create a template others can follow. By refusing to participate in collective unconsciousness, they help wake others up. Think of it this way. If everyone is simply absorbing and repeating the patterns of the collective without question, nothing ever changes. But when individuals do the difficult work of becoming conscious, of questioning patterns, of integrating their shadow, they create ripples in the collective unconscious that eventually reach others. The chosen ones are often pioneers, whether they realize it or not. They're exploring psychological territory that most people avoid. They're confronting demons that most people deny. They're asking questions that most people don't dare to ask. And all of this solitary work eventually contributes to the evolution of collective consciousness. This is your unique role, not to be popular, not to fit in, not to be understood by everyone. Your role is to do the deep work that most people can or won't do, and in doing so, to create pathways that others can eventually follow. The time you've spent alone hasn't been wasted. You've been in training. You've been preparing for a contribution that only you can make, because you're the only one who has had your specific combination of experiences, insights, and inner work. Jung believed that each person has a unique piece of the puzzle to contribute to collective consciousness. But you can't contribute your piece if you don't know what it is, and you can't know what it is without spending significant time in solitude, discovering who you actually are beneath all the conditioning. So where does this leave you? If you've been alone for so long, if you've done the inner work, if you've faced your shadow and gone through death and rebirth cycles, what comes next? Jung's answer would be integration. Integration means bringing together all the aspects of yourself that you've discovered in solitude, the light and the dark, the strength and the vulnerability, the wisdom and the wounds. Integration means becoming whole rather than fragmented, authentic rather than performative, grounded rather than split. Integration also means gradually, carefully, intentionally rebuilding your relationship with the external world, not by betraying everything you've learned in solitude, but by bringing that wisdom back to the collective. This is the hero's journey. You separate from the tribe, undergo transformation in isolation, and then return with gifts to share. For the chosen ones, this return to the world looks different than it did before the long solitude. You're no longer seeking approval or trying to fit in. You're no longer willing to participate in relationships that require you to be anything less than authentic. You're no longer available for surface-level connection, but you are available for soul-level recognition. You are open to synchronistic meetings with kindred spirits. You are willing to share what you've learned with those who are ready to hear it. The key is patience and discernment. After prolonged solitude, there can be a temptation to rush back into the world, to grasp at any connection, to prove that you're not alone. But this is precisely the time to move slowly and intentionally, letting your intuition guide you toward people and situations that match your new level of consciousness. Jung emphasized that individuation is not about perfection. You'll still make mistakes, still have moments of doubt, still experience loneliness, even after you've done significant inner work. But you'll navigate these challenges from a place of wholeness rather than fragmentation, consciousness rather than unconsciousness, choice rather than compulsion. The chosen ones are learning to walk in the world while not being of the world, in the sense that they're no longer unconsciously absorbed by collective patterns. They're learning to be alone without being lonely, connected without losing themselves, engaged without being consumed. If you've been alone for so long, this is your truth. You were never meant for the shallow end of life. You were called to the depths, and depth requires solitude. You weren't abandoned by life or forgotten by the universe. You were being prepared, trained, and transformed. Carl Jung's work offers a framework for understanding that your prolonged aloneness isn't a mistake or a punishment. It's part of your unique path of individuation. While others may have journeyed through life in the company of many, you've taken the road less traveled, the road that leads inward before it leads outward again. Every moment you've spent alone, questioning, growing, facing your shadows, and discovering your authentic self has been building something valuable. You've been developing depth, wisdom, sensitivity, and authenticity that cannot be acquired any other way. The loneliness you've felt is the birth pang of becoming who you truly are, and as you continue to individuate, as you continue to do the deep work, you'll begin to magnetize the connections your soul has been craving. Not because you're finally willing to settle for less, but because you've finally become ready for more. Remember, you're not alone in being alone. There are others walking this path, scattered across the world, doing their own inner work in their own solitude. And as you each continue to individuate, the probability of soul-level recognition increases. Your time alone has been sacred. Honor it, learn from it, and trust that it's preparing you for the genuine connections that are coming. This is the truth about why you've been alone for so long. And understanding this truth can transform your relationship with solitude from something you endure into something you embrace as part of your unique and meaningful journey. Thank you for watching. If this resonated with you, leave a comment sharing your experience. And remember, you were never meant to fit in. You were meant to stand out by going deep.